My daughter? Oh, she works at a walk-in clinic, my mother told the woman at the registration table, flicking her hand toward me the way you'd wave off a fly. She's here with me tonight. My son Derek is the one with the real connections here. The woman behind the table had a clipboard and the particular stillness of someone who'd just been handed information that didn't match what she was seeing. Her eyes moved from my mother to the name badge I'd clipped to my jacket without a word, and her whole expression rearranged itself. Dr. Callahan, Dr. Mira Callahan? My mother laughed, that high, bright laugh she only uses when she's embarrassed but won't acknowledge it. No, there must be a mix-up with the badge. She works primary care. The woman stood up straight. Ma'am, Dr. Callahan is our keynote speaker this evening. She's also the recipient of tonight's Distinguished Service Award from the Royal College. I watched the blood leave my mother's face in sequence the way a tide goes out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, what happened to every assumption my family had built around me like a cage, I need to go back. Because the night of that gala, I was 38 years old, and I had been invisible inside my own family for 27 years. And the person who finally switched the lights on wasn't me. Hit that like button if you've ever been the one doing the quiet work while someone else collected the applause. And don't go anywhere. Because what happened after my mother heard my name called from that stage, nobody in that room was ready for. My father was a Finnish carpenter in Scarborough. He had hands like slabs of oak, stained permanently at the grain lines with polyurethane and wood filler, and he believed in two things: the visible result of physical labor and my brother Derek's potential. That was it. That was the whole religion of our house. Derek was 3 years older than me, broad-shouldered, easy with a smile, the kind of boy who walked into a room and found it already arranged in his favor. He played rep hockey from the time he was 7. My father drove him to 5:30 morning practices without complaint, sat in rinks that smelled of rubber and Zamboni fumes, and cheered at a volume that made the other parents lean away. I was in the kitchen. I was always in the kitchen, or the library, or the bedroom with the door shut, and a textbook open to a chapter I'd already read twice and was reading a third time. The winter I was 11, I placed first in the regional science fair. The project examined antibiotic resistance patterns in hospital-acquired infections, not exactly standard grade 6 material, but my teacher had said I could pursue whatever I wanted, and I'd taken a bus to the medical library at U of T 3 Saturdays in a row, carrying a notebook and a student ID card and a level of determination that, in retrospect, I should have recognized as a warning about the kind of person I was going to be. I brought the ribbon home and set it on the kitchen table and stepped back. My father walked in from the garage, picked up the ribbon, read the words, set it back down. "That's good," he said, and went to wash his hands. 20 minutes later, my brother came through the back door, holding a team trophy from a tournament in Barrie. 3rd place in the U11 division, and my father's whole body changed. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and lifted my brother off the floor. I watched from the doorway. I got quite good at watching from doorways. That pattern calcified into something structural by the time I applied to the University of Toronto Medical School at 17. I'd learned to store my achievements somewhere internal, accessible to me, but not on display. Because display led to silence, and silence after effort is a specific kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays. When the acceptance letter arrived, I placed it on the kitchen table. My mother was on the phone. She held up one finger, finished her call, picked up the envelope, read the first paragraph, and said, "Medicine. That's stable anyway." Then she went back to rinsing the dinner dishes. "Did I tell you Derek's starting a property development venture? He's meeting investors in the spring." I folded the letter once and put it in my backpack. My father died during my 2nd year of residency. I was at the tail end of a 72-hour shift at Toronto Western when my mother called, cardiac event. By the time I reached St. Michael's, he was gone. What happened after was something I recognized from years of practice. My brother arrived and the family arranged itself around him. My aunts called him the man of the house. My mother leaned into him in the corridor outside the ICU, and he held her with the practiced ease of someone who knew he was being watched and knew how to be seen. I stood at the nursing station and spoke to the attending physician on call. I arranged the paperwork. I contacted the funeral home, called my father's long-term disability insurer, coordinated the death certificate with the records office. At midnight, I was still there, in the family room, writing down everything that needed to happen in the next 5 days. Nobody asked how I was. I had spent a decade becoming the kind of person who handles things, and the cost of that was that people assumed handling was all I needed. I was back on shift at 6 the next morning. In the years that followed, my brother reinvented himself with impressive regularity. Property development became financial consulting, which became corporate advisory services, which by the time I was 35 had become something he described at dinner as strategic philanthropy and hospital sector networking. He had a leased office on Bay Street that cost more per month than my first apartment, a wardrobe that communicated success at a frequency I found exhausting, and an inexhaustible appetite for names. He was particularly fond of the medical world. He'd attended a few charity galas over the years, shaken some hands, and elevated those handshakes in the retelling until he was apparently on familiar terms with half the medical leadership in Ontario. He said it over Christmas turkey. He was holding court at the dining room table, his wife nodding smoothly beside him, while my mother looked at him the way she always had, like he was proof of something she'd been trying to demonstrate her whole life. "Helena and I were talking last week," he said, reaching for the gravy. "She's concerned about the Foundation's capital campaign numbers. I told her I'd make some introductions." I set down my fork very carefully. Dr. Helena Marsh was the president and CEO of the Toronto General Hospital Foundation. She was also someone who called my office directly when she needed input on surgical program priorities, who had stood in my operating theater 4 months earlier, observing a reconstructive procedure on a 22-year-old pulled from a house fire in North Scarborough, and who had called me on the previous Thursday to discuss the burns and trauma unit's expansion budget. She called me Mira. My brother did not know Dr. Helena Marsh. He had very likely been in the same ballroom as Dr. Helena Marsh at a fundraiser, introduced himself to her, and mistaken her civil response for intimacy. That is not the same thing. My mother turned to me across the cranberry sauce with the expression she used when she'd decided to be generous. "Derek has such good connections in medicine. Maybe if you asked him nicely, he could help get you a better position. You must find the walk-in work a bit repetitive by now." His wife covered her smile with her napkin. My brother looked at me with something that contained no warmth whatsoever and said, "I could ask around," though honestly, without a research background, it might be difficult. The walk-in clinic was a fiction my mother had invented years ago and I had never corrected. The truth was that I was the chief of trauma and reconstructive surgery at Toronto General Hospital. I had been for 3 years. Before that, I had spent 12 years building a specialization in acute burn trauma that had produced 11 peer-reviewed publications, trained 42 surgical residents now working in hospitals from Halifax to Vancouver, and been cited by the Royal College in 2 successive revisions to the National Care Protocol. I worked in a unit where the patients were the ones no one else knew how to save, and I performed surgery that other surgeons sometimes described to each other afterward, in the quiet way people describe things they don't entirely have words for. My family thought I renewed prescriptions and checked blood pressure at $15 above OHIP billing. I had not told them otherwise because, very early, I had learned that my achievements produced either silence or a particular competitive discomfort in the people who were supposed to celebrate them. So I stopped presenting them. I went to work, I did the work, I came home. I gripped my fork and said, "Thank you, that's thoughtful." I drank my water and said nothing else for the remainder of the meal. But somewhere behind the professional composure I'd built over 2 decades, something had armed itself and was waiting. The gala was in February. The Royal College's annual Distinguished Service Award dinner, co-hosted with the Toronto General Foundation, held in the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York on Front Street. I had known for months that I would be receiving the award and delivering the keynote. I had written and rewritten the address 4 times on overnight shifts, in longhand on legal pads, the way I've worked since medical school. I didn't mention it to my family. When my brother announced at a subsequent Sunday dinner that he'd acquired tickets to what he called a significant medical sector event at the Fairmont, my mother's eyes going bright across the table, already planning, I said nothing. I agreed to meet them at the entrance at 7. I wore a dark dress. I put my name badge in my bag. I met them on the sidewalk outside the hotel in the February cold, the lake wind cutting up from the waterfront, and I walked in beside them without saying much of anything. My mother moved to the registration table like she'd been expected, gave the volunteer her own name and my brother's name, then gestured in my direction. "And she's with us. Walk-in medicine, primary care, she's here for the evening." I took my badge from my bag and clipped it to my jacket. And that was when the woman behind the table looked up, and the evening became something else entirely. The ballroom held 400 people. When I climbed the stairs to the stage, the room rose, not politely, not the performative kind of standing where people follow the person in front of them. The room rose the way a room rises when it means it, all at once, and the sound of 400 chairs pulling back across the Fairmont's floor was something I felt in my chest, before I registered it with my ears. Dr. Helena Marsh took my hand in both of hers and said into the microphone that my work in acute burn trauma had altered the national standard of care. and that she had watched me perform surgery she would describe to students for the rest of her career. I found my family in the second to last row without planning to look. 27 years of watching from doorways, my eyes went to the edges of rooms without permission. My mother's face was the color of old newsprint. Her mouth was open by a fraction. My brother sat beside her in his expensive jacket, and the jacket looked exactly as it always did. Precisely, pointedly costly, and somehow worth nothing in this room, surrounded by 400 people who understood what credentials looked like and understood that he had none. His wife stared at the centerpiece. I delivered the keynote. I spoke about the patients who arrive at the margins of what the body can survive, who have no buffer and no second chance, and what it requires to work in that space without flinching. I spoke about the residents I had trained. I spoke about the work that asks for no audience and expects no witness. Then I looked toward the back of the room and said, "The hardest part of a career built in the quiet is not the complexity of the work. It's learning to stop waiting for permission to be exactly who you already are. The work doesn't require an audience. But it matters. It matters more than I knew how to say for a very long time, when the people who are supposed to see you make the deliberate choice to look." My mother's head dropped. She stared at the tablecloth for the rest of the evening. My brother didn't move. He sat in a room full of real credentials, surrounded by people who would never know his name, and for the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to perform. Afterward, in the side corridor, my colleague Dr. Ananya Chen blocked my path with her arms crossed. We had gone through residency together. She was the person who had sat with me outside the hospital at 2 a.m. during my second year and told me that I was not allowed to quit. She looked at me the way she had looked at me that night. "How long have they believed you work at a walk-in clinic?" "About 15 years. She was quiet for a moment. "Mira, I watched you reconstruct a child's face after a 30% surface area burn injury, 11 hours. I have seen you do things in an operating room that I'm not certain anyone else in this country could replicate." She stepped closer. "And you let your mother tell a volunteer at the registration desk that you work primary care." I didn't answer. "You did that to keep the peace." She wasn't asking. "The same peace that involves your brother claiming he has lunch with Helena Marsh." The fluorescent light above us buzzed faintly. "How much of yourself," she said quietly, "have you folded away for people who don't know what they're holding?" I took a car home alone. I sat in the back seat and watched the city go past. The Gardner Slick with February salt, the lake somewhere dark to my left, the office towers with their upper floors still lit, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with money, nothing to do with settling scores. It had to do with the fact that I had spent 27 years editing myself to fit a story that was not true. I was going to stop. That was all. It turned out to be enough. 6 weeks later, my mother appeared at my office on the 3rd floor of the hospital. I don't know how she found it. Likely the hospital website, my name on the department page with the title beneath it. She sat across from my desk in her coat and looked at the diplomas on the wall, the way someone looks at a map they've been reading upside down for years. "You never told me," she said. I tried, a few times. I kept my voice even. "You were usually talking about Derek's ventures." She didn't argue with that. I had expected her to, and she didn't. She looked at the diplomas. Then she reached into her bag and placed a manila envelope on my desk. "I found this last month," she said. "I was cleaning out the garage. Your father had a tackle box. He kept his important papers in it, his insurance documents, the will, the house deed." She paused. "And this." Inside the envelope was a clipping from the Scarborough Mirror. The photograph was small, slightly blurred by age. A girl in a school blazer holding a ribbon. "First place, Regional Science Fair." The caption read my name. The date was 27 years ago. He had cut it out. He had kept it with the deed to the house. Below it was a card in his handwriting, the large, deliberate print of a man who hadn't written much, but who chose his words with the same care he chose his wood. It said, "She's the one who's going to do something that lasts." I don't know how to tell her that. Maybe she already knows. He had never sent it. He had never intended anyone to find it. It was a private record of something he couldn't put into words out loud, kept in the dark of a Scarborough garage for 27 years, in a tackle box beside his will. My mother pressed her hand flat on my desk, like she was steadying herself. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut. "He was proud of you," she said. "I think he was always proud of you. I think I was so busy making sure Derek felt it that I never made sure you knew." I looked at my father's handwriting for a long time, the careful, deliberate print of a carpenter's hand. Then I looked up. "I know now," I said. The spring. My aunt's kitchen, the whole family gathered, and my mother stood up before anyone sat down. She gripped the back of her chair with both hands, and her voice carried across the room with the weight of something that had been locked away too long. "This is my daughter. She is the chief of trauma surgery at Toronto General Hospital. She rewrote the national protocol for burn care. She has saved people that no one else could save. Her voice broke once and then steadied. I should have been saying that for 30 years. I'm saying it now. My brother sat across the table and said almost nothing for the entire afternoon. At one point, he reached over and poured water into my glass without being asked, and then sat back down with his hands on the table and his eyes somewhere he couldn't quite name. Whatever performance he'd been building his adult life around had run out of material. He simply sat there, quietly, and that was the most honest thing I had ever seen him do. It was not 30 years handed back, but it was real, and it was the first time in my memory that the room arranged itself around something true. I thought about it later, standing at my desk in the pre-dawn quiet before rounds, reading the chart of a patient admitted overnight, a kitchen fire, 31 years old, her right hand and forearm extensive but survivable if we moved without delay. The most important thing I have learned in 20 years of medicine has nothing to do with technique. It's this: you can be the most qualified person in the room and still disappear completely. Not because anyone forces you out, but because somewhere along the way you decided that making yourself smaller was the price of being allowed to stay. It was never the price. The work was the work regardless of who witnessed it, and the moment I stopped paying that cost, the room looked entirely different. My father had seen it from the beginning and kept it in a tackle box in the dark. My mother saw it on a February night under a chandelier in front of 400 people. Better late than never, my residents like to say about a lot of things. I clipped my badge to my scrubs and went to do the work.